What we're seeing very much in Ireland is that we are moving now from this discussion about the levels of unemployment, which was sometimes used in a very simplistic way, but we are moving now towards really realising that we are at a crisis in terms of quality of employment. And these are the issues that have been touched on. And they're very much, when we look to the issue of flexibility, I think the word has been captured now, where it often is a synonym of precarious, when of course flexibility, as was originally understood, is something deeply entwined with predictability and with planning and with allowing people to plan a work-life balance in a way that is meaningful. And I think there needs to be a reclaiming of the idea, for example, of quality part-time, of structured hours, of the planning of work. Some of the positive measures in Ireland, they are coming from both opposition and government, but they are being debated. We have had a Competition Amendment Act which sought to increase the right to collective bargaining for persons who may be individual contractors in an area. And I think there is a real concern, as one of the side effects of the increase in precarious and freelance, false freelance or pretend self-employed, is that you lose that space of collective bargaining and you lose the kind of sectoral improvements. So something that we're seeing right now is a real push to try to, and I think this is across Europe, to try to define worker, what is employee, what is worker, to ensure we have clarity there, and to ensure that we make sure we do not have the loss to the state in terms of revenue that you have from false self-employment, as well as the loss to the individual in terms of security in their life. One positive move is the push around banded hours. So we have tried to challenge the issue of 0 hours by introducing employment bans that mean there is at least some predictability within the hours that people are working. But I think it's important in my committee, and I know many others, we also work with social protection. And there are concerns that some of our social protection processes do not have been outsourced and have taken quite a neoliberal road, where they are pushing people sometimes into precarious work. And you have people in a cycle of unemployment, temporary employment, unemployment, and also in effect subsidising bad practice in terms of employment. So I think we need to look very much at the issue of work first versus education first. If we adapt to new forms of employment, it means to be ensuring that we are really making sure training is really on the table as an option, that people are not pushed into short-term work. That is important. I wanted to highlight, we've talked a lot about the digital economy in this area. It's one where I think unionisation and making sure that it is increasing in a way where there is quality work is going to be key. But another key area of growth is care. Care is a high-density employment, far more high-density than some of the areas which have received huge investment in terms of some of the start-up culture. And care is an area, as it becomes more important, it must be developed in a way where high-quality employment is at its heart and built in from the beginning. We know very much that areas and sectors where women predominate, care is one of them, unfortunately tend sometimes to have lower quality, and that cannot be allowed to happen in this area. Lastly, a very important point, and I know I come to my conclusion here, is there is a concern that the outsourcing which has come through, public services are essentially publicly delivered public services can adapt to good quality. They can innovate. They can change practices to hit, for example, climate change targets. They can be innovative. But because we have so much outsourcing, it is very difficult to employ in contracting. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. And public procurement. How do we build stronger measures into both public procurement as well? Thank you. One thing that we have done recently in the Social Protection Committee is we have tried to have joint sittings between the Employment Committee, the Social Protection, the Health and the Education Committees in our Parliament, specifically on the issue of disability. Because what we found is that people are navigating different bureaucracies. They are very often, people are navigating sets of, there is a huge work in managing a disability in terms of having to deal with the bureaucracy of a health system, in terms of when you move from the employment system, from an education system where you may have accessed rights to an employment system to access rights. And we find that those transition points are something which can often block progression. We have some positive measures, I think, in Ireland in terms of a requirement for reasonable accommodation in the workplace, which we are now beginning to try to put into effect. for personalised supports within the education system. But again, very often, these systems don't always join up. We have had, I think, as well as the access to the workplace, I think it's also important that we have conversation about progression for those with a disability, so that we don't have a very simple figure for just those in employment, which is one target, but that we see the progression of careers in this area. And I think that's also something we're seeing pushing recently, is around the importance of the representation of persons with disabilities on public bodies, on their boards and on the boards, so that the decision making at the top is very much reflecting that. I had just two specific questions to the panel. Again, the concern in relation to the optional protocol of the UN. Ireland, we are a decade behind Portugal. We have finally ratified. But I would like to just ask, was the optional protocol on the UN Convention ratified? Because I think that's certainly important for individuals being able to press on standards. And then similarly within the semester process, the concern that many of the social targets are very much how do you rate with others on an average basis, and that kind of social rights-based approach can often be somewhat diminished when we have a very blunt comparator of average or above average and so forth. So, how do we translate into quality indicators within the semester process, I think is going to be very important in that regard. And last, a note of concern. Even in last year's country report, Ireland, for example, was told we spend too much on our health system. How do we balance messages from one part of the semester that are about cutting public expenditure with the fact that we will, healthily and positively have people now vindicating their rights under the UN Convention? And we want to make sure we don't have counter indications. Thank you.